Welcome to the Lunch and Learn session. My name is Dan Monaghan for Purple Beard. This is a 1-hour session just to learn the basics about HTML. To start off, we have some lesson objectives. It's to learn the origin of web HTML, understand the basics of HTML, learn how to create the following in HTML: headings, paragraphs, links, and other pages, and then also embedded images. Now, when the internet first was conceived, it was actually invented by Tim Berners-Lee. Now, Tim was working on a computer services section of CERN when he came up with the concept. Now, at the time, he had no idea that it would be implemented on such an enormous scale like we see today. Tim had the idea of enabling researchers on remote sites in the world to organize and pull together information. But far from simply making available a large number of research documents as files that can be downloaded individually, he suggested that you could actually link the text in the files themselves. In other words, there would be cross-references from one research paper to another. This would mean that while reading one research paper, you could quickly display part of another paper that holds directly relevant text or diagrams. Documentation of a scientific and mathematical nature would thus be represented as a web of information held in electronic form on computers across the world. This, Tim thought, could be done using some form of hypertext, some way of linking documents together by using buttons on the screen, which is simply clicked on to jump from one paper to another. Before coming to CERN, Tim had already worked on the document production and text processing, and had developed his first hypertext system called Inquire in 1980 for his own personal use. Tim's prototype web browser on the Next computer, a company made by Steve Jobs, came out in 1990, and this was the start of the journey to the web we see today and use ubiquitously every single day. In summary, it's grown from its conception in the early 1990s, and it was invented by Tim Berners-Lee in 1989 in CERN. The World Wide Web has undergone a remarkable transformation since its inception in 1990. Today, the web has exploded with websites and users, and has become more complex and dynamic with advanced development technologies like HTML5, CSS3, JavaScript, and Ajax. The web today offers advanced functionality like e-commerce, social networking, and online streaming, among others. The web has a profound impact on society, and the economy continues to evolve and innovate at a rapid pace. Now, our meeting today, I have a GitHub set up and a little bit of code that I would like to walk you through. So on my screen currently, you should be able to see my screen here. If we were to talk about how a website is actually made, if we look at a website, and I'll just paste this into our chat quickly. So if anybody wanted to follow along with the code and try it out themselves later on, they can download this GitHub repository just by clicking download zip, and they can try out their hand at HTML. Now, at the moment, this is a template, and at the end of the lesson, there will be the complete code from today's session. So we're going to start off with HTML, and we also have the contents of the slideshow there for you and the slideshow itself. So with the session today, we're going to be learning about HTML. Now, HTML is just a text file, essentially. And to prove this, what I'd like to do is just open this up in my file explorer, and I've just got the file here. So if I open with and just go to search for another app, and we should be able to find Notepad here. Now, Notepad is probably one of the most basic text editors that you can get, and it's actually probably one of the best text editors in the fact that it will unrelentlessly try to open anything, including video files. It won't be able to do it, but it will try, and it'll crash doing it. But when we're looking at this, we're actually seeing that it's just a text file. Now, when we're typing this document, we probably noticed two things. Now, one thing that we notice is that we've got these body tags, these head tags, and it's very similar sort of terminology that we see in typography. Now, with typography, when we're looking at newspapers, for example, we might have the header on the front page, and then we have the body of content below that front page, and maybe some images are part of that body. Now, when we're talking about a document for a computer, we need to be a little bit more descriptive, because it's not like talking to your friend Dave or anybody else in real life, because a computer needs to be explicitly described everything that it does. It can't just guess for us. Now, we can see that's a regular text file, and we can open it in Notepad, but as you probably assumed, we have much better tools to write websites with. And this is where VS Code enters. VS Code is a free, what's called an IDE. And an IDE is essentially a developer environment. It's an integrated developer environment. So essentially, it's a text editor with a few extra features just for developers. For example, this file list down the side here. Now, the good thing about Visual Studio Code and other IDEs is that it will actually highlight your code and tell you where different parts of it are. So I'm just going to take you through some of the colors that we're seeing on this screen. And if you can't see the colors, I will also be going through the names of these as well. Now, you can change, obviously, the theme in your IDE to change these colors. So if you do have any sort of color blindness, like red-green colorblind, do know that you can just change the theme and it'll change the colors. But what we're seeing is we're seeing different parts of the code being highlighted in different colors to make it easier for us to read. And so we're looking at the red parts here. And what we're actually seeing is what is called a tag name. And these are HTML elements, okay? So we have a start tag, and we have an end tag, just the same way that we have left and right brackets to denominate the start and the finish of a context-based piece of information. So when we're looking at the body, all of the contents of the body needs to go inside of the body. So we have this left-right bracket sort of behavior in HTML. Now, what we're seeing right now is the basic template for a website. Now, this hasn't got any content whatsoever at the moment, except for a title on the page. Now, if I open this up in my VS Code, in my web browser, if I go to Open with Live Server, this is an extension you can get for VS Code that allows you to host the files locally, and it will update as soon as you save. Okay. Now, what we're seeing here is this is index.html. The reason this is called index.html is because, a little bit like the way that we have an index of pages in the back of the Argos catalog, if anybody remembers those, we have an index of all of the links throughout this entire site. So at the moment, we have no content. With the site itself, what we want is to use this index.html file. We want to describe the contents of the page. All the way between this tag and this tag, this is the HTML tag, and this basically tells the web browser that we are using HTML, and specifically the website is in the language of English. When we look at the head is what contains meta information. So information that's not necessarily on the screen, but the web browser would gain context from it by having it there. Now, I'm not here to teach you about character sets or anything like that, but essentially we have Greek letters and Chinese letters, we have Western characters, and UTF-8 is one of those character sets that Western countries typically use, so America, England, and other English-speaking countries. Now, when we're looking at this viewport, we have this viewport, and the viewport refers to whatever's inside of the web browser itself, so the contents of the page and everything there. And this specific meta tag that's in our head tells our web browser to say, I want you to use the default initial scale for whatever device is viewing this page. So, for example, if it was on a phone, it would go to the default font size of that phone, and all of the paragraphs, without changing any of the styles, would then therefore be at the default font size for that device. This also assumes that the device will need correction, so it says that the width of the page is also equal to the device width. So if we were viewing this on a desktop, it would be the width of the desktop. If we were viewing this on a mobile, it would be the width of your mobile screen. This title, this tag here, actually describes the title that we used to see at the top of the window, but nowadays we usually see this as the title of the tab of the page. So if we open this up in a tab, just the same way that if we go to, for example, Google, if we go to Google, the title of this page is Google. So we have a title tag, but of course we've seen on many websites throughout the years that we have things like headers, and we have paragraphs, and we have leading articles. And these typography elements, so we have these different parts of HTML that we see on nearly every page that we go to. We have headers, just like we had headers in letters of yesteryear. We have body content, which is text, paragraphs, and bullet pointed lists. And these are all things that we're going to learn how to write today. Now, I'm going to start off by saying that when you're working with an IDE, you don't have to type your elements one character at a time. And as you just saw, the end tag for this element has just been automatically added. Now, we have something called emit in HTML, which is essentially a way for us to write shorthand for HTML, and our IDE will actually write the rest of the code for us. It's just a little bit quicker than writing all of these left and right triangle brackets on every single element. So we can use Emmet to speed up development. And if we go to the documentation of Emmet, there's actually a cheat sheet that you can find. There we go. And this cheat sheet basically just gives you a few things that let you just type in and it will generate some code for you. Now, we'll see this in action as I go through the session now. So I'm going to close up this cheat sheet and get my document ready. Now, because this is the document that we're going to be working in, this is going to be our hour of HTML. So HTML in an hour. And as you saw, when I saved that, the HTML in an hour updated in the tab. So the title of the page is what we would typically see in Google search results, for example. When someone is looking for your page, the title of your page is what comes up as that link. When we're looking at the body content, we're talking about things that are actually displayed on the screen when the user is there. Okay, so we can start off by learning about headings. So I'm going to start off with a heading. And these sections that I'm going to be talking about, I'm just going to put what's called a comment in the code. And this means that it's something for the developer to be able to see, but it doesn't present on the page at all. And you can view it in the source code if you have a look with the inspector in your browser. You can actually find these comments. And these comments are just going to be our little guide around the source code. So I'm going to start off by creating some headings. So we have H1 is our typical top level heading. If anybody has written any sort of dissertation or essay in the past where they've had to use different heading levels, like heading 1, 2, and 3, we might be more familiar with these from Microsoft Word, for example, where an HTML document can be directly compared to a Microsoft Word document, but just with extra steps and a little bit harder to write in a HTML form. Now, the thing that we're going to learn about these is that we have several layers of headers in HTML. So we have H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6. Now, these headers, I'll just press enter and you'll see that VS Code will automatically generate these for me, which is fantastic news because I don't like typing as much as I can. So this is what we call a heading level. Now, if I save this, you'll notice that the default styles, and we'll talk about those in a moment, the default styles of the web browser brings in heading 1, heading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. They all start with these different sizes, and these different sizes are meant to infer to the user that the heading is a different level. So when we're looking at these H1 all the way through to H6, we have these in order of, say, for example, sections on the page. Typically, you would go with heading 1 to be the title of your page. So we would use H1 for the logo of your page in most cases. So we have HTML in an hour. The first thing that we're going to learn about is headings. And maybe the second thing that we're going to learn about is paragraphs. Now, if I save this in a different space of heading 1, heading 2. Now let's just save that. Now I'm going to move this over and zoom out a touch so we can see this at 100% scale. And I will also put my phone inside. I'm very sorry about that. So we have these different level headings. Now, as you can see, we've got headings here. Now, heading 2 is what we're going to use for our description of the sections that we're going to be talking about. So I'm just going to split this up a touch. So we have headings. This is a section of content. This is our main heading. These are example headings. And then we have our second section, which is paragraphs or typography. Now, in paragraphs, we can discuss several different things. For one, I'm not going to write content for this. I'm just going to use something we refer to as lorem ipsum. And this didn't do that. 1 sec. Now, if I save this, we can see that it just comes up with a paragraph straight away. And we can see that that starts with this P, and it ends with this /P. Now, for the interest of pointing out the obvious, we see that the end tag has this slash beforehand. And these are called, these are just basically denote that this is the end of the previous opening tag. So we have the opening tag, we have the content of that element, and then we have on the outside this end tag. Now we have this for most elements in HTML. There are certain elements that we have that aren't necessarily closing with that left and right bracket pattern, and we'll look at those in a moment. Now, one of the ways that we can add emphasis to our paragraphs is by using the M tag. And if I zoom in, you can actually see this well. When we look at what the emphasis tag actually does, if I just right-click on inspect here, we can see that the emphasis tag is actually just making this italic. And this is just to emphasize. When we add emphasis, we don't have to necessarily stick to these styles, but the fact that the emphasis is there means that users that don't necessarily use their eyes to use a computer, which is something that is very, very prolific in web design, is accessibility concerns. How does someone use a computer if they can't see the screen? So this is where HTML sort of has its importance in web development. HTML describes the structure of the page without having to have any sort of visual cues. So this could be read out by a machine, and it would be able to tell the user the context of the information. When we're looking at the emphasis tag in particular, it would emphasize these words to a person that was using a screen reader that would read the page to them, and it would say emphasize. It would tell them that this part of the text is emphasized. When we look at how to make something bold, in other words, how to thicken the text, what we can have a look at is strong. Now, strong is just for strong kerning. And when we look at strong, it just adds that bold. But like I said, this is the visual side of things that we're seeing in the web browser. The content structure itself, the actual architecture, the layout of the content and the context of the information is what the HTML is describing. When we're looking at other ways to deal with information, we don't necessarily have the ability to use paragraphs as the most efficient method to show our information. So this leads us nicely into lists. And I'll just open up another H2. So we have lists. And there are three main lists. And today we're only going to touch on two of them, which is the main and most common ones, which is an unordered list. And an ordered list. And I'm pretty certain that you'll both be, that everybody will be able to spot the difference between the two. Now, like I said, I'm not going to be writing out HTML from scratch. That's because we have more modern tooling nowadays, and we can do this with Emmet. So an unordered list uses a UL tag. Okay, so unordered list. The tag does then need other tags inside, which are called list items or LI elements. This LI element will typically have a bullet point or a number, depending on whether you use unordered or ordered lists. So we have an unordered list, and this could be item 1, copy that down, item 2, and we'll copy that down, item 3, and press save. And now when we look, we've got this bullet pointed list. Now, if I was to completely just copy the exact same code here, but then change the UL to OL, which is an ordered list, and save, we have an ordered list there. Now, this is interesting that we've got this content where we just have H2 and a paragraph. But in this section, we have a H2, and then we have two different things that we need to talk about inside of this section. So this is where our experience with essays, or maybe for describing the sections within sections, we might want to talk about using a H3 to say unordered list. So we just copy that, pop it in there. Ooh. We save that, and we've got an unordered list. And we'll move this down to here, and we'll change this one to ordered list. So we have these different sections now. Now, the reason I was talking about screen readers and the context of HTML is because as years have gone by, HTML has become more of a description of the context of the information. So when we're talking about all of the content on our pages, we need to be able to describe to the user the context. And one of the things that we can use to test the context of this information is by using something like Wave. Now, Wave is a browser extension made for developers, and it's actually an accessibility evaluation tool. And it will tell you whether you have any contrast errors, for example, whether you have white text on white background. It will tell you whether you have any errors in your HTML, and it will also tell you about any sort of alerts. Now, if I go to my view details, I have very small text, and this is a problem that we have with H6 by default. H6 is very rarely used in modern web, purely because of the default styles, and also having 6 levels of headings deep does tend to get a little bit overwhelming for most readers. So we have H6 for legacy reasons, but in modern web development, you'll rarely go past the 4th level of headings. When we're looking about what other alerts we have no page regions, and this refers to what's called semantic HTML. And this is something that you would join us for further training on. But semantic HTML basically describes the layout of the content, and you have elements such as article, main, heading, nav, and all of these describe the structure of the page without adding extra detail. We have all of these contents laid out, and when we look at the structure of the page, we can see that these are indented just like the same way that we would see indents on a table of contents. And that's because these headings have a specific order, and we have sections of content that we are talking about at heading level 2. So we know that every H2 on this page is talking about a different part of HTML, and maybe the H3 is different parts of that content. So describing the content structure is something that we're constantly having to do for computers, because computers don't necessarily understand visual cues or context. And it's our job as developers to write those visual cues or those contexts for a computer to understand. We can see that we have all of these, oh, not bookmarks, wrong one. Let's switch off Wave. Let's refresh the page. There we go. So we have these different sections here, and we also have seen the pattern of left and right brackets of the tags having a start and an end tag. The next part that we're going to move on to is how to actually link from one page to another. Now, there are several ways to do this. What we'll do is we'll just open up a H2 to say that we're talking about links. And we'll just open up a paragraph tag first off, and we'll say links can be used in line with a paragraph look at this link to Google. So I'm going to have a link to Google here. Now, unfortunately, there was a little foresight for the naming of these tags. For example, if we wanted to add any styles to the page, in other words, change the way that it visually looks, like change the background color, change the text or the font size, or anything to do with the visual looks of this, we would use a language called CSS. Now, CSS, it's just a list of rules to say what something should look like. And we link style sheets to our pages. But if we were to talk about how links work, or hyperlinks work, to Tim Berners-Lee back in 1990, he might say that it is an anchor to the page. And this is because links can be used for many different things, or anchors can be used for many different things. Now, just the same way that we have a start tag and an end tag for everything else, we also have a start tag and an end tag to our anchors. Now, these anchors have a few attributes that we can talk about. Now, href refers to hypertext reference, and the hyperlink actually points to this page when we click it. Now, if this was my personal website, for example, I might not necessarily want Google to change where the page actually is. I might want to open this link in another tab. And so we have another attribute here on an anchor tag. Let me just drop this down to another line so you can all see the code directly. So we have this anchor tag, we have this href attribute, and everything we see in green on these elements, by the way, these are attributes and values. So we have a key or a name for the attribute, and then we have a value. Now, when we're looking at anchors and we want to open this in a new page, we have an attribute called target. And target can either target the current window, which the default is either self, but the most commonly used is blank. So if I put blank in here, save the page, refresh the page in the browser, and scroll down to my Google link, now when I click this, it opens it in a new tab. Now, this is useful for if you want to provide context for the information, but don't necessarily want to send a user to a different website. Maybe you want to open it up so they've got that for reference. Maybe you want to add links from your YouTube video, for example, to a website, but to keep traffic on the page, YouTube will open that link up in a new tab. So these are different ways that we've used modern links and how we use the code that we use in HTML in modern web development. But this isn't the only thing that we can do with a link or an anchor. We can also, if I just create a copy of my index and I rename this to link example, I'm just going to get rid of all of the content here in this second copy. And we're just going to say that this is the H2 link example. And we're going to have an A tag that goes back. And so this is going to go to our index.html. And we'll just put some nice friendly writing there. So we'll just put the word back with some arrows. Now, if I was to open this page, I would get this link, the link example H2 and the H1 HTML an hour. And what I need to do is I need to link this, another page. I need to link this to my link example.html. And we'll take this target off. And now we have this link at the bottom called link example. When I click it, instead of opening in a new tab because I've removed the target and it's going back to its default behavior, when I click link example, it takes me to that other page. And then I click back, it'll take me back to that first page. We have now created a website that navigates between two different pages and has separate content. Now, this was the vision that Tim Berners-Lee had, was to have this very simple way of interacting with a document, and you were able to click links or press buttons that took you to other documents. What we're looking at here with HTML, it's more than just a text file. And the way that we refer to HTML in modern society or modern development, we refer to them as a HTML document. So although it is more complicated to write HTML than it is to write a Word document, there is a lot of overlap that can be said for the two. When we are talking about how we can add extra content to our page, we've talked about all of the text and things that we can do. But one thing that we would like to look at is images. So we'll add another H2 and we'll type in images. And I'm just going to quickly go to one of my favorite websites in a moment. And I'm going to grab an image to drop into our website. Now, one thing that I will say is that it's highly recommended that you check the rights that you have for any sort of content that you use on the web, especially if you are using it for business or commercial gain. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab, let's go and grab a picture of a frog. He looks like a good lad. Let's download a small one because I don't want to have to resize it. And I'm just going to drag and drop this straight into my assets folder, and we'll rename it because it's got a silly name. So we've got our Froggo. And what we're going to do is we're just going to add this image at the bottom. Now, so far, we've looked at tags that have a left and right bracket sort of behavior, where they have a start tag and an end tag. And this is where we start to look at the differences. Now, we have what's called self-closing tags. And the first example that you've seen of this without being introduced to this concept is actually at the top of the page. We looked at these two meta tags. This meta tag, it doesn't have a right bracket or an end tag per se. It just automatically stops being the content of the page. So this tag actually self-closes. And if we were to look at the text of yesteryear, we used to actually put a slash at the end of a self-closing tag. Fortunately, we don't have to do that anymore. We have self-closing tags and they do actually self-close. And instead of having this left-right bracket, when it comes to images, we have the image tag. And if I just press enter, we can see that we get two attributes straight away. We have an SRC, or a source attribute, and then we have an alt attribute. And if I hover over this, because like I said, I'm using an IDE and not just Notepad. If I hover over this, it'll actually tell me this attribute defines an alternative text description of the image. And this just ties back to what we were talking about earlier with accessibility. If you cannot see, how do you know what that image is? And it's our job as developers to make sure that that is accessible information. So I'm just going to press Control Space, and this will bring up a suggested content for wherever my cursor is. If I do it over here, we don't really get anything. But if we do it here, it gives us a list of the files that we've got in our folder. And we have this assets folder, and then I've got a froggo.jpg as the file that I want to select. Now, this means that my website should now have a frog at the bottom. And this frog at the bottom, I can see this, but this is where we should describe the image. So it doesn't need to be overly specific, but a green frog sat looking to the right of So now my website actually has this information. Now here is where there is a double function for this alt attribute. Now this alt attribute is more than just information for blind people to use computers. It's far more than that. Say, for example, you were using a website to host your images and something went wrong. Now the page can't load the image, but because the alt text is here, we get a description of what the image should be. So whenever you've seen this broken image icon, and you've typically had a little bit of text behind it, it's because the developer has intended for you to be able to know what the image is, even if the image has been deleted. So in this specific example, I removed the second G from Froggo. So in our source code, it's looking for a file with 2 Gs. It can't find that file. Like I said, computers are dumb. You need to be very explicit and tell them everything that you want it to do. So let's just rename this Froggo back to G Froggo. And as you can see, it just straight away fixed itself. So we have this HTML, this very, very simple HTML that takes us through several different aspects of the page. We have the headings that we use to structure the different sections of the page, or at least the sections of content. We also have the H1, which is typically we only have one on the page. It's bad practice to have multiple H1s, but H1 typically refers to the absolute top level, and it's typically the title of your document. H2 is your average section header. So this is H2. It's like, it's not the title, but it's a section within this document or this content. And then H3 would be sections within sections, and so on. So H3 downwards is really just sections within sections, and you can get as close as you like. But like I said, any more than 3 or 4 levels of headings, and you're starting to get a little bit messy with how much content you've got in one section. So we're talking about structure of the page, not necessarily how it looks. The way that it looks is something that we do in CSS, and the interactivity that we see in modern web is something that we actually implement with JavaScript, which is another language. And we have several examples that you could come and learn with us on the front-end development course with Purple Beard.